We've been looking at the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, how Nehemiah prays, how Nehemiah plans. Today we want to look at how Nehemiah motivates. Nehemiah knew that he could not rebuild the walls of Jerusalem without some help. So he needed the help of other people. But when Nehemiah arrives in Jerusalem, the people are defeated. They're apathetic. They're living among the ruins. In fact, twice before, in the last 90 years, someone has tried to rebuild those walls. They failed twice. So the people have no confidence. They're very, very negative. For 90 years, they've been saying, it can't be done. It can't be done. Yet Nehemiah arrives on the scene. In a matter of days, he has rallied the support of the entire city. He mobilized them. They begin the project. So the question is, how did Nehemiah pull this off when other people had failed to do it? So this morning, we want to look at this portion of the second chapter of Nehemiah for 6 biblical steps that Nehemiah uses to motivate the city. We want this to be very practical. You can use these biblical steps when you're trying to cooperate with other people, when you're introducing change in your family, when you want to get a project off the ground. 6 things that Nehemiah did. So please take out the sermon notes that have been provided for you. Step number 1 in your notes. Expect opposition. You expect opposition. That's the starting point. In fact, the moment that you say, let's do something, you can expect opposition. Somebody, for some reason, is going to say, let's don't. When God's people rise up and say, let's build, Satan says, let's oppose. People are just naturally resistant to change. So the people like the status quo, which is Latin for the mess we're in. People resist change for a variety of reasons, as we will see in the book of Nehemiah. So we read Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. And Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, official, heard about this. They were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. So Nehemiah said, I went to Jerusalem after staying there 3 days. So Nehemiah here names 2 leaders of the opposition. They come forward throughout the book of Nehemiah. Sanballat was the governor of Samaria. Tobiah was the leader of the Ammonites. You notice that Nehemiah had not even arrived when the opposition was arising. Nehemiah hadn't done anything. Somebody must have warned him. Look at 1 Corinthians 16, verse 8 and 9, where the Apostle Paul writes, I will stay at Ephesus because there is great real opportunity here for a great and worthwhile work, even though there are many who oppose me. 2 words to focus on there, opportunity and also opponents. And this is the first leader's law that I want to share with you this morning. In your notes, there's no opportunity without opposition. There's no opportunity without opposition. You can count on it. If you're going to help change a situation or change some people, you can expect opposition. But when you're motivating others in your notes, there also needs to be the right timing. Timing is everything when you're trying to motivate people. Would you agree with that? There's a right time, there's a wrong time. Have you ever had a good idea killed because of bad timing? So in your family, you have a great idea to do something, but it was a terrible day at work, or an unexpected bill arrives, bad timing. Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem. It says he stayed there for 3 days. He does nothing for 3 days. He did not arrive on a white horse in a grand parade, maybe like Hollywood would portray. He just arrived in Jerusalem, did nothing for 3 days. What did he really do, you think? He probably was resting after a 1,000-mile journey on camel. He knew that you don't have major leadership decisions if you're tired. He may also have been praying for those 3 days. He was a man of prayer. He also was planning and reviewing his strategy. He was building curiosity among the leaders and the people of the city. So Nehemiah wants people to be ready for the time when he presents his proposal, a proposal to rebuild the walls of the city. Look at Ecclesiastes 3, verse 7. There's a time to be silent and a time to speak. Jesus also had a profound sense of timing in his own ministry. Many times Jesus said, "My time has not yet come." It's not time yet. So step number 1, expect opposition. Step number 2, you get the facts first. That's F-A-C-T-S, not F-A-X. Get the facts first. Look at Nehemiah's research party going out to get the facts. Nehemiah chapter 2, 12 to 16. This is sort of like a Paul Revere's midnight ride. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me. Told no one what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one which I rode on. When I went out by night, by the valley of Gate, to the Dragon Spring, to the Dung Gate, and I inspected the walls of the Jerusalem that were all broken down. Its gates had been destroyed by fire. Then I went to the fountain gate, to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley, inspected the wall, turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, the rest who were to do the work. So Nehemiah, he was personally inspecting the damage in the middle of the night with only a few men. Every good leader knows what Nehemiah was doing there. Why at night? In your notes, Nehemiah is simply doing his homework. Yeah, he's doing his homework, his background checks. This is the lonely part of any leadership. This is the non-glamorous part of leadership. This is not the part you hear about, but it's called preparation. Getting the facts first. I'm sure he was saying then, this project is worse than I thought it was going to be. Why did I volunteer for this? I would never build a wall in my life before. I'm a cupbearer. Nehemiah had not told anyone why he was there. So why is Nehemiah so secretive about this? Nehemiah didn't want his plan to be stalled before he got out of the starting gate. There have been 90 years of negativism. Nehemiah didn't have all the facts yet. So let me ask you, is it easier? Is it easier to promote a good new idea, or is it easier to kill a new idea? Yeah, to kill it without doubt. Because negative people are always more vocal than positive people. Have you noticed that? So here's the leader's law in your notes. Leaders protect their plans from premature death. Now, leaders will protect their plans from premature death. Just look at Proverbs 23, verse 23. Get the facts at any price. Hold on tightly to all the good sense you can get. On the back of your notes, look at Proverbs 18, verse 13. What a shame, yes, how stupid, to deceive, to decide before knowing the facts. So here's the third leader's law in your notes. Good leaders do their research. Good leaders will do their research. Step number 1, you expect opposition. Step number 2, you get the facts first. Step number 3, in your notes, identify with your people. You identify with your people. Look at Nehemiah 2:17. Then, meaning after he had identified the opposition, after he had gotten all the facts, then I said to them, you see the trouble that you're in? Is that what it says? No. You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us, Nehemiah says, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. All good leaders do this. You associate with the people. I'm one of you. You don't walk in from the outside and say, you're all a bunch of miserable failures. You can't get this thing built. It's been 90 years and nothing has been done by you. When you start blaming people, you decrease the motivation. When you accept the blame also, you increase the motivation. Good leaders identify with your people. Even kids in your family are motivated better when you identify with them. You show them you understand them. So the next leader's law in your notes. The best ideas are not mine. The best ideas are not yours, but are in your notes ours, because you identify with your people. Step number 4, dramatize the problem. You actually dramatize the seriousness of the problem. Nehemiah says, first, I want to give you the bad news. Then we'll get the good news. He does not minimize the problems. He dramatizes them. So look at Nehemiah 2, verse 17 again. You see what? The trouble. Jerusalem lies in what? Ruins. Its gates have been burned with what? Fire. Rebuilt so we will no longer be where? In disgrace. Nehemiah dramatizes this problem. And the word picture emphasizes his emotions. Why? The people of Jerusalem have been living with this for many years. Isn't it a fact of life that when you live in a bad situation long enough, you start ignoring it? Something breaks in your house. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, it really bugs you. 6 months later, it's still broken, but it doesn't bug you anymore. Nehemiah is saying that when you live with a situation long enough, you can actually become apathetic. So Nehemiah refocuses their attention on the problem. We have a mess. We have trouble here. Nehemiah is getting the people to face the facts. He's done his research. He first got the facts. Now the people must face the facts. Why does Nehemiah do this? Because change never occurs until somebody becomes discontent with the bad situation. If you want to change something, like when the paint is coming off the walls of your church, or the mortar and the brick outside needs to be replaced, somebody has to notice it and then become discontented before any changes will take place. If you are content, you don't want to change anything. And you certainly won't invest your time and your money to support the project. So Nehemiah uses 2 motivators here to start rocking the boat, create a desire for change. And you notice number 1, Nehemiah appealed to their self-esteem. Nehemiah appealed to their self-esteem. He says, we are in disgrace. Nehemiah says, we are God's people, and we are living in rubble. The city is torn down. The walls are torn apart. Nehemiah is a leader. He realizes that the people are demoralized. So he's concerned about their self-esteem. But number 2, Nehemiah goes even deeper than that. Nehemiah appealed to their concern for God's glory. He appeared to their concern for God's glory. Not only were the Jewish people being disgraced, the fact is that God was being disgraced also. Who were the Jews? They were God's people. So Nehemiah appealed to their concern for God's glory. Nations were saying the greatest God of the whole world had a people that could not rebuild the walls of their own city. God was being disgraced. It was a poor testimony. So as Nehemiah is trying to motivate the people, he does not use external motivators. He doesn't say we will rebuild the wall and the one who works the hardest gets a new camel car or win a trip to the Dead Sea. No, external motivators work good on kids. You clean your room and you can watch more TV. The older you get, the more mature you get. Here's leader law in your notes. The greatest motivation is not external. It's not internal, but rather the greatest motivation is eternal. Greatest motivator in life is eternal. So let's rebuild the walls to the glory of God so that God's name is not in disgrace. Let's rebuild the kingdom of God. Step number 5 in your notes, ask for a response. Nehemiah asked for a specific response. Come, let us rebuild the wall. Nehemiah pumped them up, but then he gave them something to do. Nehemiah's call for action. He appeals for help from the people. So notice something there about Nehemiah, the leader. In your notes, Nehemiah was both realistic, but he was also optimistic. Both realistic and optimistic. That's a balance that good leaders must have. Nehemiah got the facts first. He was realistic. He saw how bad it really was. I couldn't even ride my horse all the way around the gates because the rubble and the bricks were piled so high. He's realistic, but Nehemiah is also optimistic. He doesn't give up. He says, let's rebuild. The leader's law is this, in your notes. Leaders see both the real, that is what is. Leaders also see the ideal, what can be. Leaders see the real and the ideal. If you see only the ideal, then you're just a visionary. If you see only the real and not the ideal, then you're an accountant. Leaders see both the real and the ideal. Leaders must ask for help. They just can't do it by themselves, or they're not leaders. Leaders must ask for help. Number one, you expect opposition. Number two, you get the facts. Number three, you identify with your people. Number four, you dramatize the problem. Number five, you ask people for a response. And step number 6, in your notes, Nehemiah encouraged the people with a personal testimony. You encourage with personal testimony. Look at Nehemiah 2:18-20. He said, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king has said to me. And they replied, let's start rebuilding. And they began this good work. The God of heaven will give us success. We as servants will start rebuilding. So Nehemiah's story has 2 parts. In your notes, number 1, he tells them how God had actually called him. He told them that as the cupbearer, he had prayed for 4 months, and God gave him a vision to rebuild the walls of the city. But God not only called him, God also confirmed it through the king. Number 2, in your notes, he tells them how the king had confirmed him. The king said yes. The king is even going to pay for it. When the people heard that testimony, when they heard Nehemiah's story, they responded, let us start rebuilding. What had actually happened? In your notes, the vision. The vision had now been transferred. Nehemiah's vision to rebuild the walls had now been transferred to the people. God has a vision. God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, so that all who believe in him would not perish, but have eternal life. God tells his story. It contains both law and gospel. It's the good news, it's bad news. Sin is the bad news. Death is the bad news. But until you hear the judgment of God on man's sin, and you have no need for the good news. When you hear and see the vision that God has, when you become a child of God through faith in Jesus, then he wants you to tell his story, to share the good news with others. Look at 1 Corinthians 11, verse 1. Paul says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Paul's story is really about Jesus, and then about the hand of God upon his life, and how God had really changed him, how he forgave him, how much Jesus loved him. So the final leader's law in your notes. I'm ready to lead people when people see God's hand upon me. Nehemiah told the people about the gracious hand of God upon him, and then the people responded. So let us start rebuilding, they said. Our concluding prayer is that all leaders, for the leaders in our church, may God's hand rest upon you. May God's people see that God's hand is upon you. Amen.